Perhaps no indie game this year has been more anticipated than JRPG Sea of Stars, but does it shoot for the heavens or sink into the abyss? Hey, don't you get lost at sea. Head over to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames and kick the gaming echo chamber right in the balls. Join our Discord, gain early access to content, and more. Sea of Stars is not only incredibly faithful to the golden age of JRPGs, but it's masterfully designed in a way where it doesn't feel out of place in the slightest all these years later. You'll begin this epic adventure by selecting between one of two characters, Zale or Valerie, but fear not, this doesn't alter the story in any real way, it simply dictates which character you'll control on screen. The pair are on a journey to become the children of Solstice and will go through rigorous training to master epic magic and take down the remnants of the evil Fleshmancer, who left behind, quote, seeds of evil across the lands. You'll quite literally see these characters grow up together throughout the adventure and of course meet plenty of other party members along the way. From your lovable childhood friend Garl, who sadly had his eye scratched out at a young age, to comical yet likable personalities such as Teeks, who will follow the party collecting and sharing stories at campsites. Characters are really well developed in Sea of Stars and highly memorable. Almost any player will find a relatable friend at some point throughout the game, which is great because, as you probably know, strong characters and epic storylines are a huge aspect of any great JRPG, and Sea of Stars absolutely nails it in that department. Yes, plenty of twists await in this narrative, which is phenomenal. It's engrossing and beautifully presented throughout. Sea of Stars often asks difficult questions of players, perhaps the largest of them: should children so young be swept up into a conflict this large? These are just a few of the hard-hitting moral dilemmas you'll be presented with. One thing's for sure, the rich, detailed world is chock full of history and a joy to explore and learn about. Things take a bit to ramp up, yes, but once you're off on the main journey, Sea of Stars truly begins to shine brightly. As tends to be the case with most JRPGs, Sea of Stars gameplay centers around exploring a massive world to advance your journey and taking part in turn-based battles reminiscent of classics like Chrono Trigger. You'll have a bevy of towns to explore, caves and dungeons to conquer, and evildoers to defeat. Traversal is rather simple as you run about with the left stick, and to my surprise, you're going to be doing quite a bit of climbing. There's ladders, of course, but also if a cliff is within reach, you can hop right up, jump off of ledges, do some swimming, and practice your backstroke. This game has a good amount of platforming. That did surprise me a little bit. One thing that could be frustrating in a lot of old school RPGs was that you'd often run into a cliff or dead ends and kind of be forced to find some lame way around, but many times in Sea of Stars it's as simple as taking a leap of faith. Not only does it look cool, it makes the game move at a quicker pace and feels more immersive. Villages are not only full of unique townsfolk, but also where, as you might expect, you can purchase new equipment and items. Equipping is a breeze in Sea of Stars. The game does a great job of telling you which equipment is better, and it will even auto-equip and sell your old gear, making this a very simple process. You'll also be able to cook with ingredients found along the way through a cooking system that also couldn't be much easier. I love the simplicity of crafting new dishes, as I've never been much for the crafting and cooking aspects of these games. On top of that, there are plenty of fishing holes across the world map with, you guessed it, a fishing minigame. It's fishing. Other minigames also exist, such as Wheels, which has its own set of rules if you really want to get into that. One thing's for sure, there's no shortage of things to do and places to go and people to see in Sea of Stars. The dungeons, as I alluded to earlier, are a blast to explore. Outside of the platforming, they are littered with little puzzles to solve, making this way more of a puzzle game than I was expecting. These range from using a wind ability to restore power and push blocks, to flipping switches and forming new bridges. The design of these areas is really sharp, intuitive, and I didn't find it overly frustrating. I looked forward to each and every new labyrinth, and my confidence in the developer's ability to deliver a masterful experience soared further upward with the completion of each one. Gosh, we're 4 minutes in and I haven't even touched on the turn-based combat. It manages to feel familiar and comfortable, but with some nice modern touches. Enemies are visible on screen and battles initiate when the party leader makes contact with them. There are no timers to be concerned with for your party, so you'll be able to take your time and plan out each attack carefully. Another handy feature is that the game shows you how many turns it will be until the enemy attacks. What really makes this combat system fun is the ability to dish out additional damage or take less by timing button presses for the moment of impact. This is optional, but makes battles feel a bit more engaging, kinda like the Gunblade back in the day if you've played Final Fantasy VIII. That's an underrated Final Fantasy, by the way. Timing the defense I found a bit trickier than hitting on offense, but this is due to every enemy having a bit of a different attack animation. I loved how some abilities had you hold the action button, while others members would have you time the presses, such as a skill from Valerie where you ping-pong your attack off of characters. I never got tired of that. In fact, I got the achievement for doing 25 of them in a row. Comment below if you got that. You of course have a variety of these skills which cost MP, and each time you attack you'll gain a bit of that MP back. This system encouraged you to use your skills even on the most basic of encounters. Got knocked out in battle? No worries, party members will revive with 50% of their health after the stars circling their defeated body disappear. The more you get knocked out, however, the more stars will appear over their heads. It's a really cool system. I thought it was super clever. But all of this said, Sea of Stars presents you with some really tough battles, and I took more losses than I'd like to admit. The bosses in particular will require a bit of strategy, but they're so satisfying to take down. And thankfully, death isn't a huge deal, as you'll typically pick up close to where you left off and with restored health. For players who really struggle, there are additional relics that can be equipped, which makes the game quite a bit easier, but I personally enjoyed the challenge level of this one. As for healing, you can use spells outside of battle and items too, including the items that you've cooked at the campsites, which by the way, you do set up camp at particular locations in this game, whether it be the world map or there are designated areas in some of the dungeons. I always like these sections because your party would separate and you'd get to have little conversations with each other. I really loved it. The other thing I want to touch on quickly is the lock system in this game. You may have noticed that little lock above enemies' heads. This is when they're about to use a special, and if you deal out the appropriate damage type, you can break those locks, which will weaken the enemy or even cancel attacks entirely. It's not necessarily essential to do this, but I really grew to love and appreciate the system. Initially, I kind of just bashed away at my foes, but as battles evolved, I was swapping characters with ease to line up the next attack to the appropriate symbol on the lock. Yes, certain enemies have certain vulnerabilities for a total of 6 different damage types. Combos can also be initiated between party members, which comes at the cost of combo points. Breaking locks will help you to build up more of your combo meter, but I didn't even touch on the boosting yet either, which allows you to absorb live mana. It takes a few hours to unlock this feature, but basically if you attack certain enemies, mana will come flying out of them. You can absorb it, and it will make you a bit more powerful. Upon leveling up, players also choose a bonus stat between raising magic defense, attack, hit points, mana points. This made Sea of Stars feel like it gave me decent control over the type of character I wanted to build. It may sound like a lot, but RPG veterans are going to feel very comfortable with all of these systems, and they're really well introduced, not being thrown at players all at once. All told, whether you're traveling through towns, conquering dungeons, or battling monsters and bosses, Sea of Stars is just a joy to play. If I were to offer one critique, which isn't even really a flaw per se, it would be that this game might not appeal quite as much to fans who really love the grindy aspects of this genre, as it continually moves at a fairly brisk pace. Visually, Sea of Stars, I mean, just look at this game. The pixel art is breathtaking. Whether you're walking a tightrope, climbing rock walls, Super Mario World style, I still love that effect all these years later, or you're battling a massive boss, this is one of the most beautiful JRPGs I've ever played. The animations are just adorable, very fluid, text boxes were all easy to read, and landscapes are quite varied. The amount of detail and time that must have went into the art is just astounding. The characters come through with great expressions, and things just look wonderful on the Steam Deck even too, with the smaller screen not really taking anything away from the finer details. There's even a few animated cutscenes which only further heighten the visual presentation. You don't need me to tell you how gorgeous Sea of Stars is, just look at this video. By the way, speaking of the Steam Deck, this is a deck verified game. It runs beautifully on there. No complaints whatsoever, a locked 60 frames per second. Didn't run into any crashes or anything like that in my time with the game. Now we get into the soundtrack, which is quite the eclectic mix, and I really enjoyed it. You have 2 composers, one you're gonna know very well if you're a fan of video game soundtracks, particularly JRPG soundtracks. That's the legendary Yasunori Mitsuda, who I believe has lended 10 songs to this game. All of them, of course, are excellent. They're pretty recognizable because Yasunori's sound is just so distinct, you're probably going to notice them, but the main composer, Eric Brown, phenomenal work here. He did some excellent tracks as well. Don't take anything away from him because the soundtrack as a whole really works quite well. If I had to compare it to another game's OST, I would probably say Chrono Cross. It has a little bit of that oceanic vibe to it, a lot of chill beats, some great bass, there's some happy, crazy tunes in certain towns. Everything just matches perfectly. This is a great OST. It's one you're gonna want in your collection if you love Japanese role-playing game music like I do. Ah, crap, this review is getting long, so thanks for sticking with me. I've done a crap ton of talking, and I still haven't covered everything. I could go on about the awesome day-night cycle puzzles, and ultimately the emotional second half, but look, just go play Sea of Stars. Sure, maybe I could even nitpick a few more things, like the limited fast travel system, though there's some awesome shortcuts in this game, so even that is a pretty small complaint. But if you're a fan of this genre, this is an absolute masterpiece and earns itself the golden genie lamp of approval. Strap in for 30 plus hours of epic adventure.